I'm going to just read out the written format of another chapter in MK Trail 4. And it starts out in that video talking about the Fantastic Four, these 4 participants that were in a Antarctic pole event, riding these pods called seed pods into the Earth's, following the lines of the Earth's electromagnetic fields. And the magnetic field resonance ended up affecting their brain templates, and so the controllers of this experiment tried to do reprogramming attempts. What would happen is that these participants had magnetic disturbances happen within their brain templates, and what they were doing is called brain flipping instead. And this occurred when some assets became somehow polarized, like they were shifted and flipped. So what they ended up doing was flipping their memories onto each other. And what happened after that was containment. Containment was initiated because of this, because this was something new that they didn't have control of, whoever was controlling this experiment. So the assets called it file flipping, and they ended up doing it to piss each other off. Like they could do it behind a glass window or something and affect each other's brains. And they didn't even realize or understand how they were doing it. So genetic memory suppression also occurred, grid keeper knowledge as well, and understanding of the golden fleece buffer zone. Assets were also contained and held in encapsulated transharmonic hyperdimensional fields and places as such. Sometimes these places were good because it would preserve the integrity until you were restored to your normal location via data pocket dumps and case-in-point retrievals. Reducing the alpha particles to basic consciousness, input-output. The tertiary domain was mainly working with crystals stratified along the secure spectrum of networks. Two covert ops results were presented in transduction sequences and in morphogenetic overlays through quaternary turbines. The human template miasmas could subdue the core matrix and carousel systems. So the assets learned about their human templates, their morphogenetic fields, how to subdue false systems, core matrices, and the carousel systems that came out of the programming. So it's like they took control of their driver's seat finally, after each layer of unraveling kept happening. And that comes from buried subconscious response mechanisms and analytical switch relays. And the controllers use binary thought hijacking mechanisms in an attempt to bypass the deliverance of our oversouls, hoping to replace our brains into their holographic phantom system that locks DNA into an artificial evolutionary process in the name of hybridized advancements. And gene sequencing, which is like DNA being in a cog in a wheel. Kazakhstan was where we learned about Leviathan history and sea bases, Caspian Black Sea cryostasis units, learning to transmit emotion through water molecules, through sea-based experiences, avatar training postulates, and we became pulsars for each other, tracing each other's signature, like sonar systems, and then Mother Echo was born out of those hydro locations. Each base has a form of a honing device, even in sleep. So it's always active, because AI doesn't sleep, robotic things don't sleep, clones don't sleep. So what you had coming out of these bases when you had been tethered to them and key-coded into them, paired to them like a Bluetooth uplink, was phase conjugating sequences, and that resulted in hive mind attachments. And via frequencies, phase conjugate overrides, and then we became trackers, responding to different codes, fail-safes, and diversionary tactics. For explicit purposes. Soul splicing also happened after the sea-base events in the 80s using theta wave devices, which blocks out any weaponization of your mind, like turning somebody on or off. On, off, past, on or off world, planet experiences, and pre-existent Earth realm knowledge of realms was extracted from certain children. The knowledge of estates, abode locations, what's called the archive, realm warfare, and the history of the warfare within the heavens, and the history of the universe that was imprinted within some of these assets. And the controllers of these programs had apocalyptic expectancies and used the assets as catalysts to initiate Armageddon. They sent children to various quadrants for object retrievals, twin pairing, off-world mission engagements, and on-world, and then the creation of future Sparta 300. Many timeline advancements happened well into the 90s and 2000s, and the use of children to change and alter sequences of events and history resets, and they became a League of Legends. New waves of children were brought in for integration at different posts and periods of time, and there was a file called the Mind Compendium, Compository Exchange Rates, and the Antarctic has files of briefings and trade secrets with other race war strategies via hidden buried pyramids and other things that are stored there, not just at the Antarctic regions and the wall that's there, the ice wall, but in other ancient sites, compository exchange rates, and commerce that happens there, and essence, trading floors. So then pyrokinesis training happened in the 90s, and that kept us consistent with bilocation events, and we were brought to MyLab type classrooms and facilities and blended into one kind of congruent memory, and that became a time block for many that resulted in suppressed memory of extractions from the bone marrow, which holds the cellular memories, and is replaced with other elements and materials, and the pains and procedures that happened post-pyrokinesis training, which was Schunger's lab in Missouri. And in 1988 was the first Slender Man contact, which was like a psi mind virus, and some assets made the target disappear, and this was high psi warfare, the Slender Man encounters. So timeline distortions occurred in 2000s. The use of free will became punishable, and fear programming was written into all assets. The bases expanded and transportation devices, creating more quantum entanglements and clone and time body work on and off planet. The CIA retrieval measures at the galactic waste stations brought more trade agreements and struggles for different sectors. Biomaterial was passed on to next gens, and there was a lot of AI combat casualties as a result. Chaos God archetype programming happened in the 2000s with a control group, and what that did was corrupt the core bonds with the assets because it affected their ability to operate in a cohesive tandem manner. And other assets had demigod programming, and that was inlaid like a totem to disrupt our ongoing current workable benevolent ranks and orders. This is asset mismanagement that happened and resulted in reoccurring, repeating SRA type events. Saturn base Nevrocron is an area where there's a hybrid nursery and they use programmable matter as toys. Future popes were selected in looking glass, and the black pope is veiled through the white pope. Possible procurements occurred through the use of children's seeing and chronovisor results. In 94, post-Pegasus files resulted in parallel merging with selves and different selves, people's selves, and timelines, leaving the only option to block out the two suns. The artificial sun simulator came out, and other sky anomalies, and a complete canvassing of the binary universe from public eyes, as to not invoke hysteria in the public domain and the civilian realms. And then the movie Another Earth came out, and other things to condition society. The Phoenix Force Phoenix events broke the grid and the mold through gamma absorptions and things that had not been done before. Controllers wanted their grid ingested into everyone via the use of food, injections, water, things that they spray. So some of us canceled and knocked it out. So they wanted the grid to be slowly nano-ingested into everybody. Scalar columnar waves put us in holographic scenarios, cloning centers, and then placed us back in time locality at the moment that we physically left. Too much switching of bodies creates a need for contingency clauses because of the damage that it caused to some, and dangers happen to bodies approaching the event horizons if located reality constructs were contacted. Because it has to be a foci point, like a loci point, to be able to go through time and not be tethered or have an intention to have a fear kick in at the very end and not want to do it. It doesn't work that way. You have to be one with the point and the reference point, A to B, in a string that acts kind of like a cosmic string that you're writing on. This can cause a ripple in the sea of consciousness, altering artificial states and tracks, time tracks, and fabrications, rendering them non-existent. If you have the ability to completely focus and be one, and be in tune with the frequency that was allotted in that time slot. So we learn to reverse systems engineerings through a consciousness that sometimes inadvertently absorbed and downloaded beast tech pulsations just by being around them, walking around them. And instead of allowing that to become a magnification, we disassembled it and did our own biolocation quantum jumping instead, which rendered us as anomalies. Mass focality, positrons, 515. Soul catcher tech boxes used pieces and parts. Now there were risks in the first trial of the secret space program and learning to work in tandem points with a tactile team. Transporting human and non-human passengers with a not-so-good faction at first. Factions nested themselves into time locutions and secret compartmentalization, masking tech and cloaking screens within the folds of the Time Wars, and they were called time wave runners as well. So they operated on like a space maglev trans system. The sixth time gate building is by traveling to the past and the future of divergent timelines. Omega programming was in 1999 that thinned and culled the herd. Phoenix projects were 1 through 3, and as well compartmentalized Dream Scan, Mind Wrecker, Orion projects, and Moon Scan. Age regression happened with all the involvees, and Project Surrogate, putting the babies into a mother's womb that was picked out in advance. But there is also age advancement, which is where we get the movie Benjamin Button and other things, where a baby is pulled up into a ship by gravitational devices and then age advanced and then sent out. And then the surgeries are undetected. Montauk used God helmets and mind amplification devices through giga and terawatts that affects a person, creating a vortex 5 miles wide and then feeling the reverberations going back and forward in time, creating their own vortex, essentially, was the field observation. One conundrum is that you can't go back exactly to the same place in origin that you originated from in time, because space itself shifts, even just merely by your observation and going along those parallel tracks. It can create a Herkheimer effect as your signature leaves a trace wherever you go, like a fingerprint. So time clearing occurs then when you walk over it again and you go back to the same location at a different time. Walking through your own time wall, you create a pocket space, a interdimensional pocket space. And that's part of Interstellar, and that's like a signature space print versus a fingerprint. And that is where we got Traveler's Signet. Good devices like an organically outfitted enhanced synapsid processor can be powered by a micropositron. Negative devices can create a flow in a channel mimicking functions within the nervous system itself, because you can map out the nervous system just like a tick can do and create Lyme's disease. Micro relays is the result. And what happens in some of these computers is you can create a duplicate brain operation and extract any engram patterns as well, overlaying that onto the composite. Then you get hyperspace holes that open up in your bodies and through human bodies. In the 2000s, there was also Pentagon breaches of contract with certain assets, and they were taken 3 bodies into a gold ship taken from Montauk, memory wiped of their knowledge of off-world prisons, sea prisons, and space containment ships, which was very different than the file of the Voyager's movie story. Crystal ships helped integrate soul shards and residuals and bring integration. There was 12 satellite stations that some factions used as the bodies were there to put a different soul in those bodies, the soul inhabit them, and that became like a walk-in type of laboratory where a person has a walk-in that comes in there, and then that's the driving force of that vessel. So the rogue MyLabs tried to take down those stations, and 8 satellite stations were destroyed, and the rogues were then taken to Containment Sector 9. The timeline generators and procurement of the most tech and the most fittest of soldiers or assets is still Missouri and Oklahoma. Home on the range. Gravity amplifiers can fold space and time velocity instead of folding. Can fold space-time velocity instead of folding completely in on themselves via hyperspatial drive systems. Hyperspatial drive systems for aviators. Spontaneous combustion was also taught in Schunger's lab, the pyrokinesis labs in Missouri, and the ability to burn down the core shaft of a DNA strand. Total recall was shown to some assets as a total of the timeline sequences, and then they would have that taken away from them, so it was like in reach or within their grasp, but sometimes they wouldn't let you have the whole thing. So the drugs that were given to assets were ZIP, altered adrenalin, cordrazine, cortropinex, formazine, and hyronalix. Mass amounts of cattle adrenaline were harvested because that can affect the psyche, and it's also used in labs for grafting purposes and for breeding programs, the construction of cloned bodies, cloned biomaterial, and then also for physical restorative properties as well. Some of these centers had to have certain stable EM fields around them and special characteristics, so the cloning process doesn't work as far as the angular rate of particle spin would go. Parallel time streams. An example would be the Germans overtly winning World War II. Time streams are expressed as different patterns and outcomes depending on the level of expression for the entity. A person is also an entity legally. Varied potential tracks exist as one unified central force. Parallel tracks change one world depending on which track is chosen. It's like the domino effect. Cause and reaction as an effect. The Orion group targeted people before they became a social memory complex at times as they saw direction and orientation for their group, and so the Orion group would try to steer them away from their destinies and show them false futures instead and have them consent to false futures being spoken over their life. That was aimed at spiritual entropy, targeting those vibrating in their highest vibrational complexes, and aligned with that. Their wish was to dissolve social memory complexes because that can affect the patterns of history. Now, the planet has had many electromagnetic realignments as the collective transitions it between densities. 2002 was a symposium of holograph duplicates of super soldiers that were sent into the future and broadcast as disturbances and created disturbances. You can create and grow and import genetic crystals and create generations of energy by doing that. Green gas, or the green line that came out of the pyramids, was contained via the induction and use of instruments in resonance chambers like the King and Queen's chambers to open portals. Fort Meade, Maryland had a cylinder craft. You could approach it by following a heliopath around the cylinder, and the traveler could spiral down into the negative T direction with sublight and at sublight speed within the local future of one's light cone. Hacking systems were tested to block the pings of Saturn's rings. If you've ever read The Wingmakers of Saturn, and soldiers ran offense from satellite weaponry. And this was enacted on participants to take their futures out after the Diamond Spider Wars and dealing with the Antares group. Spectrophotometry and astrocartography was a skill set used together. And actually the quantum agency originates in the divine higher dimensions. Singularity in hyperspace-time is a periodic toroidal standing wave. It's seen as such. The global continuum, the world line of interconnected quantum causal, is the world line of interconnected quantum causal manifestation. Hyperspatial info makes up transference of probabilities into realities. Chronomorphology is scalar reflections from real space into hyperspace, forming an accretion and like a backdoor, also called reality bending or Q-lensing, which affects ankylosing proteins in an asset. To counter-resonate soul groupings You have to meet the optimal quantum conditions and have paired resonance for successful teamwork, counter-resonating into other groups and soul groupings. The Unseen Q group was released in 2010, and they were isolated into coexisting through implied contracts, agreements of non-interactions until they could go public, and phase unlocking would occur with each one, rendering them activated and operable. And this brought everyone back into a static flux. Phase groups can be quantumly disconnected from any other mutually exclusive phase group. So we had exclusive rights laid out in contracts and given new NATO and SATO Pentagon clearance. SATO being Space Alliance. SATO. The space-time toroidal phase groupings association is dependent on emotional growth styles, which will allow a group to heal linear time cracks externally and internally, environmentally, and avoid paradigm conflicts. Because paradigm conflicts have a natural dimensional resonance factor to them that go into distinctly different mass soul basins, pools, schools, groups, and batches of bodies. And there are techniques to avoid dimensional mitosis, and so that can be avoided. And the truth is that humans carry geocosmic forces within them and around them, and can react through just being in one another's energy fields, and the human cavity of the earth too. So some of these assets that had the highest abilities were intercepted by the unholy watchers. Denial is munition, symbolically, a reinforced form of perceptual control. Cryptographic munition, psi munitions, leads to extreme apotheosis designed to instill tacit consent. And that's used to divert and impact heavenly contact and spin the situation into the benefit of a non-benevolent control group. Echelon tracks, covert invasions on Earth, and then we also have Earth's Defense Force mitigating that in those circumstances. And the tinkering occurred with temporal lines and what's called emigration or immigration stations into Earth. Temporal lines are like placeholders. They're not hypothetical, they're temporal. They do exist in a space and a time in and of themselves, connecting waypoints 360 degrees. So you need to remember, all of us in humanity spoke as one once. There's one language of hyperdimensional symbols that were codified into human relationships with nature and Adamic nature, and the animals spoke as one. So we're not as disconnected as what we think, and with the earth as stewards of the earth. Auric protection shielding can be used to refine our spiritual armor and our tools and help offset trans-agency groups and dark groups that are hidden and inlaid within these. Many wars were mainly hostile multinational corporation takeovers. Chaos can be a powerful herd management tool used to steer consciousness. The Bearden elf scalar bubbles arc into phase space, and that can generate things into our atmosphere to look like radar rings. Formulated intent is a co-function of vision and joined body image, motion going into imaginal, psychophysical, subspace domains. Formulated intent. Mass focality. Nonlinear resonance is in coexistence with empathy. can be in coexistence with empathy, formulated. A connection can fail if its incompatible, intentional, emotional, imaginal pattern mismatch occurs. This occurs with ships. If ships are biolinked with biomaterial into the control panel or other things that a ship can be driven by, biometrics, the connection can fail if a person tries to approach that ship that's incompatible in their intent. Their intentional, emotional, imaginal pattern mismatches in the occurring. It's not like you put your fingerprint on a ship or something. It's a biopaired ship that interacts with the driver. And even med beds are resonant and cohesive with our thoughts and our thought patterns, and a lot of alien tech is. Non-resonant psychic conjugation factors are present. Non-resonant psychic conjugation factors are present in the operator interfacing with the craft. The operator, it's like the operator to craft have a handshake. The elites at the North-South Pole as stakeholders were nicknamed the ones who held rarefied and sought out and searched for rarefied essence as power brokers. Rarefied essence power brokers. Echelon 7 controls the compartmentalization of Echelon 3 through 6 and transfers all alien tech. Echelon 7 and 5 and 7 are key double players that rotate Time Bureau and non-localized levels for future securities. Re-engineered hybrid bodies are in vaults in Echelon 3 through 6. And there is incarnating that happens with these vaults. Incarnating into dead-ended soul lines also occurs, not just walk-ins. Vessels are chosen for incarnating into dead-ended soul lines, for continuation of those bloodlines. The soul vortex that we have are supposed to be powerhouses. And the false sun generator was never meant to gravitate, we were never meant to gravitate to. So that's part of the Soul Catcher program with the dark side of the moon and the moon base, Clavius. Now, Hitler and his team and other people and groups like that were literally taught by demigods in Betelgeuse Edom groups, which he wanted to incorporate with the Black Sun Fool worship, the false sun generator, which comes from the Edom group, stemming from Betelgeuse. The present and the future are counter-phasing, which is creating birth pains and also time tab adjustments. Interstellar veiled was displaying parts of the veiled heavens in an unraveling as the binary universe gets closer in the coming of the Messiah. Echelon 1 and 2 are building blocks for 5, 7, and 9 eyes to formulate into agencies. Echelon 8 through 10 is unacknowledged archives and quantum access program domains, realm domains, the next stage of human awakening to complete the end of the ages and the finale of the war in heaven. Reversed magnetism projected inwards can create liquefaction. All technology augments our experiences and the soul filters the growth. Unified field theory unlocks doors in a geometric blanket. The Ironic breastplate and that technology and the gems was like a computer, and that was replaced by the seals that we have in the House of Jehovah, that are power cells through righteousness alone now, and upright standing with God. There are hyperdimensional arenas. The names of these arenas are Solaris, Renicula, Solumnus, and Artibula. The sons of Belial are also called Kantekkians. In 2011, Many were open to all possibilities and to see the playing field from all levels, even AI levels. Modum operatum consortium holds. The consortium then held mass information in the data clouds by things like the concepts of Skynet. Realm dynamics is when a supernova is present and cosmic energies are there, and our stars abide in realm dynamics and hyperdimensionally process things like a go-to spot that is much more than a Merkaba field. It's like a home for the Merkaba field. And our realms and what we do there affects our daily outcomes. Because there's many variables in our realms, they can be clean or unclean, depends on what we do with them. It's the source of our stored luminosity, like a candle flame. Dissonance between people attracts synchronistic triggers for confrontation. So where we originated from, since we are made of star matter and other things, is a result of what we attract and don't attract, which comes from origin points, which goes back to realm dynamic. So learning a lesson ahead of time helps it not manifest as experience, but also can jam processing and create offsetting, like a tidal wave in static time. If you've already seen something in the use of tech or vision or looking glass or whatever and didn't actually tangibly experience it, this can create hiccups or reverberations from not actually tangibly experiencing that, but kind of going around it. 2013 brought a root of causation like a mirror. Brought a root of causation like a mirror out. Many things were cleared in a collective level. The auric fields are subtle patterned information that comprises thoughts and emotions, so they can be read. Holograms encode info by recording the interference patterns between two waves of a common frequency. One wave is uniform in its consistency, and the other has its phase altered by the information that is to be encoded. Frequency determines what information may be accessed. If a hologram is recorded with a red laser, which represents the past, then a green laser will fail to elicit that image. Blue is for future, red is for past, but the green is like a neutral point. So I had a red blinking dot in my arm as a kid, and also these silver scanner balls that would come in the room and stop and open up, scan you, and you'd be paralyzed like in a doorway. So this red laser research in the holograms reminds me of that because it was like blinking. The hologram process has metaphysical parallels to it. Fractal lines can dissolve holograms. Fractal lines can also create holographic disclosure in their permanence, because many can observe these things. Space for advancements comes through mastery of spatial reasoning. Subatomic particles are measured and have wave functions that lock phase with the instruments and the observer, and whoever is reading that instrument lock phases with its wave function. The instrument's wave function lock phases with whoever reads the instrument. They lock phase with its wave function. So three things, these two things have zero phase difference between them when there's an observer. Potential fields are water current, like water currents. superpotential fields would be like the water itself, trickling through and following trails and lines to creating formation and form out of non-form, and the ability to pull things out of space to manipulate fields. Hyperdimensional technologies and conscious are the only two things that have been recorded as observing and manipulating fields. The aura has the subtle emanations, like I said, and what it does is it's like an interface matrix between the originating consciousness and the external environment. And it's much more simpler fields than the complex electromagnetic fields, and that's why it can be read with military tech. The resonance field is the encoding region for the hologram phase lock and what archetypal elements a person attracts or doesn't attract. Emotions are surrogate motivators, catalyzing our spiritual growth and pushing us forward, carrying us into other dimensions, bringing out the inaccessible. So emotional clearing was very big, and also in Dianetics to pop the lid off memories and to cancel and clear any emotional charge, to discharge a person so that they can have full integration. Temperament is life's attitude and emotional climate. So be well and good luck in 2022, fellow comrades.